Many years ago, I was I was working in a cafe, and I think I was in my early 20s, and I'd work in this cafe and make coffee and help set things up and all that very typical stuff. And one day I was there setting up with one of the managers, and he gave me a cake. It was like a cake, almost like a sheet pan of brownies, you might imagine. And he said, can you cut this up? And I said, sure. And I went to start cutting it up, and he said, oh, do you know how to cut a cake? And I said, well, what do you mean? You just cut it. And he said, yeah, but do you know how to cut it so that they come out relatively even? And I thought about it, and I thought, well, no, I didn't. I would typically start at one side and eyeball it, and but very often they would come out pretty uneven. And he said the way that he learned how to cut a cake in a pan like that was to first eyeball it, but cut it down the center, and then cut it the other way down the center, and then again cut it half and half and half and half, and then you ended up with a cake with relatively even slices. So I love that, because I one thing I realized over the years is when I learn sort of a tip or a trick, and it shifts the way that I'm able to do something, and especially if it shifts how I perceive things. When I look back at many of the things that I've been drawn to over the years, whether it's NLP, which I love, or meditation, or martial arts, all these things. I would say one thing they have in common is that they're experiential in nature. They're not just theoretical. And I do enjoy theoretical things. I find them very interesting. But what I really enjoy is when I learn something and it gets me to try something in my experience, and I have a different experience of the world as a result. So I love things that allow me to perform what I would call an experiential experiment, where you get to try something one way and then try it another way and see what happens. Now, when it comes to meditation, and I started dabbling in meditation probably in my mid to late teens. I would say my experience of it in the beginning was primarily just frustration, difficulty. It was a challenge. So that was a difficult thing. And I think many people have a challenge with something like meditation, where the cause effect connection can be quite delayed. So um, so what drew me to meditation initially was a bit of the promise that I had heard from people, like, okay, if you practice meditation, you might achieve X, Y, and Z. And so, I think I had been told that if I meditated, I might achieve some peace of mind. That sounded attractive. I might have some aha experiences, which I really adore. So that was very attractive to me. I might experience some type of realization, or kind of a deep aha experience. So that all sounded great. So it was like someone telling you about that Christmas is coming and Santa Claus is coming. There's going to be all these gifts, and I find it quite interesting that that with meditation, I stuck it out for quite a while, because it certainly, my experience of it certainly didn't match what had drawn me to it initially. My initial experiences were that it was challenging. In fact, very challenging in relation to the way I was taught initially. My first attempts, I felt completely unsuccessful, whatever I had in mind about success, in relation to, someone said, okay, sit down and don't think, which was nearly impossible, or count your breaths, which also was nearly impossible for me. I would count 1 or 2 breaths and I would be gone. Or I was also very challenging because it was hard for me to sit without fidgeting, or or just sit still, and my legs would start to fall asleep, or it would be painful. Um, now I somehow I learned to do it, and I think a lot of the way that I learned initially was just because I was part of a meditation group, and kind of what we did was meditate a certain amount each day, or a certain amount each week. So that kind of got me through. And ultimately, I just felt like it was a oops, there's a bug. Ultimately, I just felt like it was a good idea, so I kept at it. Now, down the road, something interesting happened, which was um, not necessarily some huge realization, but I eventually found um, great utility in it. Like I finally realized over time, like, oh, if I just sit down quietly for a certain amount every day, I actually learned how to sit down quietly and learn how to calm myself down, get to a calm place relatively quickly, not let fidgeting sort of get in the way. And I was able to do that. But that was pretty long before I realized how to do that. And in fact, I think I probably could have learned it sooner had I not been so focused on trying to count my breaths or something. I think at one point I read a book that basically it was there's a famous Zen master named Dogen, and in the book it said just sit, like don't worry about anything else. As long as you're sitting, you're fine. So that idea sort of stuck with me, and so that's what I did. I would just sit, and over time I realized like, oh, I'm able to sit relatively quietly now. And even on days where I was having a lot of inner turmoil, I realized like, okay, I can sit with slightly less inner turmoil by just calming down and letting my nervous system calm down. So in any case, that was sort of was interesting. The cause effect of like trying that and feeling an impact was quite a bit delayed. It wasn't even just delayed that day; it was delayed months, years. It was a sort of delayed payoff. I'm glad I kind of stuck it out. Now it's something that I can sense almost immediately when I sit down. I just know that, okay, if I sit down in this way, my body will calm down. Um, I think when it came to practicing something like um, martial arts or NLP, the the kind of the time frame of trying something to having an impact was much more sudden. With many of the NLP exercises, I would try something very simple, like I'd be sitting there, and we did an exercise which I've done on one of the recordings, where I was asked to think of something that was troubling and then to look up and continue to think about it and notice how I felt. And what I realized is, my feelings changed immediately. And so that allowed me to notice, oh, if I use my neurology in a particular way, it has this effect. Um, and again, it had this thing of kind of a mini experiment in your experience, something that you could sort of validate as opposed to just an idea. Um, so that's a little bit about my pursuit of these different sort of uh, experiments in your experience, and whether it comes from NLP or meditation or martial arts. Um, Martial arts was also like a great sort of testing ground for this. If you used your body a certain way, you were very effective, say, in blocking something. Whereas if you used your body another way, you would get clobbered, essentially. Um, so that was another really ripe practice ground. As another thing I didn't mention, like playing music is another one where if somebody guides your attention in just the right way, all of a sudden you're able to play with greater facility than you had before. Um, so that's a little bit about my ongoing journey in sort of experiential experiments, and to a large degree, that's why with most of my talks, I try to give something that you can actually try on and see how it impacts your experience, as opposed to just giving an idea. So I encourage you to go and experiment.